Morning, guys. I've literally just woke up, well, a few minutes ago, and I've just, yeah. So I just thought to do, while I've got the time, this morning to talk about my Titanic journey and how it all got started and where it all began, sort of thing. So for those of you that are interested in watching my first Mythical Musing episode that I did with Pit the Pagan about Titanic and my Titanic Facebook group, I will link it all in the description below. So, welcome back to a new video. I haven't been able to film in a while due to the fact of work and school and outings that I do. So, yeah. So, let's get started. So, my Titanic journey started back in '97. I was 11. I was still in primary school and I was living in West Yorkshire in Featherstone before I moved, way before I moved to where I live now. And it's when I first saw the Titanic film directed by James Cameron, who's made, I think, 33 dives to the Titanic. I know in my last video I said 16 because I couldn't exactly remember what it is, 33 dives. And I remember when I first saw that film, I was actually living in Vernon Street in Featherstone. And I had a big poster of a Titanic on my wall, in my bedroom wall of the movie. And also I had the book to go with the film, and I had it on video back then when it first came out on VHS. Way before DVDs. I'm actually from the generation way before DVDs. DVDs didn't come out till much later on. You know, when I was a kid, cassettes were still being made, videos were still being made, and obviously CDs and things like that. So I'm definitely from a VHS cassette generation. And I remember when I first watched, I was actually with my mum, and I think my mum went to see it in Bradford at the cinema, and yeah, and I remember watching it with her, and I just instantly fell in love with it. And I was like, what's this film? And she was like, oh, it's Titanic. And I was like, oh. And I just sat there and kind of watched it with her, and I just kind of, was really taken to it. And it was kind of like an instant kind of connection, to it. And I remember about a year later in '98, I ended up watching on Channel 5 Catherine Zeta-Jones's Titanic with Peter Gallagher. And I personally find that quite good. I know that it doesn't really make any references to Thomas Andrews and things like that, but I did enjoy it. And that's when I found about the Allisons. And I got to know about them back in '98. And I did my first post on the Allisons, last night. I did 2 posts in one night. I did one on Violet Jessup, and I did one about the Allisons as well, just trying from memory what I could initially remember about the Allisons, from memory, because this is going back to '98, so it's just what I initially could remember about them. And so for those that don't know the story of the Allisons, a first-class child called Lorraine, she was the only first-class child to have to die in the sinking. She stayed aboard with her parents because they were searching for their big brother and child, Trevor. Little did they know was that the nanny actually had taken Trevor to a lifeboat, so he was safely on a lifeboat, but the parents didn't know this. So they tried to get Lorraine onto a lifeboat, but she wouldn't let go of her mother. And so she, and then I think there's another one where there was no more lifeboats. Because the lifeboats, majority were filled up with first and second class, and by the time the third got up on deck, there was no more lifeboats left because the first and second class had kind of taken them all. But everyone wanted everyone up on deck, but obviously the third class were right down at the bottom. The first and second class were like easy to get to. And so so they stayed on board looking for Trevor. But unfortunately, they didn't know that Trevor was already on a lifeboat, and they all died in the sinking, both her father, the mother, and also Lorraine herself. She was the only first class child to have died in the sinking. And they were a very wealthy first class family, very wealthy. And so, yeah. And so as a few weeks went on, I was still in Vernistry at the time. I was actually looking through a cupboard underneath the sink, and I came across a newspaper. And the newspaper was The Times 1912, but it was actually a re-release due to, on the back of it is the movie release. And it's like a reprint of the original that came out in April 15, 1912 of Titanic and the collision and everything. And I kept hold of it, and the next day I took it into school with me, and I showed my head teacher, Mr. Parky, and I was like, I have this at home. And he was like, wow. He was like, you're interested in Titanic? I said, yeah, I have the movie on video. I watched it with my mum, and I really, 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 really like it. I'm really connected to it. And then I found this at home. And it's like, like kind of a sheer coincidence sort of thing, watched a movie, then I discovered this newspaper that we had at home. And so I showed it to my head teacher, Mr. Parkin, and he was like, can I borrow this? And I said, well, you can keep it. Because I'm a nice person, I gave it to him. And he was like, wow, thank you very much. And then I also had the Titanic book to go with the film at home as well. So I also had that. So I kind of had a little Titanic collection going on from a very early age. And as the years progressed, my collection kind of grew a bit more. I remember when I first moved here to where I am now, I actually went into WH Smith's and I saw a Titanic documentary. And it was talking about, the Ryersons and, Lawrence Beasley, who was a second class passenger on the Titanic. So it was kind of beginning, to grow and learn more about it, through studying. And it had a book with it, and I still have that documentary, now. And I had a book with it, but I lost the book over the years. And then I began to watch more documentaries, on YouTube. And that's when, back in 2012, I watched a documentary where a pair of shoes got found, and they had to go to the unknown child's grave, to get a DNA sample, whether these shoes actually belonged to him. And it turned out they did. So they gather the connection. This child is named Sidney Goodwin, and he was part of the Goodwin family, and all of that family perished, and he was the only one to have been found. He got found by a group of fishermen, and that was a few weeks, or I think a month after the sinking, because bodies were still being found, days after, weeks after. I mean, one body was found like 700 miles away, from the wreckage. So they were still being found literally all over the place because the sea currency had moved them. And then, as more time went on, I got another copy of Catherine Zeta-Jones's film, Titanic, and this one had a lot of memorabilia in it, like replicas of iceberg warnings, when Titanic got released, in posters, the price listings, food menus, and things like that. And I had it all over my wall, and I lost all that via moving. And then on eBay, I bidded for, Titanic newspaper folder, and I actually won it. And it has it has Titanic magazines, back from '97, and and other things like that. And when I was flicking through the newspapers, I actually came across the same newspaper that I gave to my head teacher, Mr. Parkin. So I took it, as a sign, kind of like, well, this newspaper has found its way back to me, sort of thing. And so technically, I initially still have the one that I had when I were a kid. So it's kind of, found its way back to me, sort of thing. But it was the same one I gave to my head teacher when I was in school, in primary school. And then as more time went on, I was beginning to watch kind of more documentaries and things. And, I do have the soundtracks to the film as well as, DVDs and, and things. And so my study kind of continued to progress. And then recently, I went to the Titanic exhibit in Middlesbrough. I went 3 times. And I saw like all the movie props of the Titanic film. I never thought that I'd ever see anything as close up to what I had, of seeing the movie props from the film that I grew up with when I was a kid, which really kind of struck the interest of Titanic. I've also seen Night to Remember as well, which kind of, I don't think there's really not a Titanic film that I haven't seen, to be honest. I think I've seen all of them. And I remember when Ghost of the Abyss back in 2001, when that got premiered at Bradford IMAX, but I didn't see that until a few months ago, actually, when I first watched it on YouTube, and now I own it on DVD. So yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah. And so when I went to, the Titanic exhibit in Middlesbrough, I saw the movie props, artifacts from the Olympic, artifacts that were covered from the ocean, stuff to do with passengers that had perished, and, things like that. So it kind of took me on a journey around, Titanic, and, being around stuff that I generally were very familiar with and grew up with when I was a kid. So it kind of really felt like home, because Titanic is a childhood thing with me. It just kind of grew and progressed over the years. And, and now I done episodes on Titanic. I've run now a Facebook group on Titanic. I've obviously in my hometown there's actually a maritime museum, because where I live in Scarborough has Titanic connections, because Moody, Sixth Officer Moody, or Palude, fit the pagan, he he was actually born in Scarborough on Grenville Road, and then he lived in Grimsby in Hull. So it's just basically on the side of the river from Hull. It's in Lancashire, or somewhere like that. And so the Maritime Heritage Shop does have Titanic books and newspapers, so I've been in there quite a few times, and they've got the model of the ship and authentic coal, which is from the Titanic, and so I've been in there quite a few times, to do further more studying and reading and things, which helps me to run my Facebook group, and also to do episodes on the Titanic as well. And for a while, learning group with, when I was a kid, which no one really knew that I had, this kind of strong connection with Titanic, because I really kept it under low key. I wasn't really telling people, until fairly recently. when you know I went into work, you know, with a Titanic magazine, um, and which was last year now. I went into work with a Titanic magazine. I was like, "Oh, you're interested in Titanic?" I said, "Yeah, I have been since I was 11 years old." And they were like, "Since you were 11?" I said, "Yeah, since the movie came out back in 97." And they was like, "Holy crap." And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, I've been slowly kind of building my collection up over the years. Because when I lived in Featherstone, you know, we just had a local newsagent shop. So there wasn't really anything kind of Titanic related in there. And, you know, in WH Smith, you know, Titanic stuff I find is really quite difficult to find in shops, you know. It's not like an everyday thing in shops or even charity shops when I see Titanic, you know, things related. But I had a lucky find yesterday. I found this. The Titanic Survivor, the memoirs of Violet Jessop, who was a stewardess on the Titanic. And, you know, when I were in York yesterday, and that was £2, so I quickly grabbed it, you know. And I also find another copy of the Titanic film in WH Smith, not WH Smith, sorry, in HMV in York, and I grabbed that as well. And so it's not every day that I initially see Titanic stuff, until, you know, I was old enough and was able to order offline, you know, where I was able to kind of build my collection up even more of, I do have a Titanic halter. So it's only over the years since it's actually progressed, because not a lot of things when I was a kid did I see anything Titanic related other than lots of films, you know, and TV and, you know, and things like that. And so I wasn't really around any books and things when I grew up, due to the fact never really saw any in shops. You know, it's really, even now I hardly see any Titanic books related, any documentaries being sold, you know, in even CEX, you know, it's everything just seems to be more online where Titanic stuff is concerned. I hardly see anything in charity shops or even, you know, in HMV, you know, it's mostly everything is all online, so luckily I have access to that. So even back then, it would have been really hard for me to find anything, you know, Titanic related. But I did hold memories of the films that I watched and you know, documentaries that I got to know and watch over the years, you know, as I grew up, you know. So it became a lot. I was a lot more aware, a lot more understanding of it, you know, as the years progressed, as I got older. Um, you know, and to understand what happened and kind of you know, kind of become more progressed in learning with it. And now with what I learned, you know, over the years, I now am able to speak about it, do YouTube videos on it, and also do I run a Facebook group as well. You know, a lot of my posts that I do, I try to do it all from memory. I don't kind of like as much as I can remember, I will put it into a post. Or like I will take notes and write it into a post, you know, if it's kind of a new subject that I generally want to talk about. But I do try and do my posts from memory. You know, the Allisons, you know, go back to 98. So it's kind of, you know, trying to remember everything, you know, from there, make sure that it's accurate, you know. But yeah. And so, yeah. I know that there's a lot of conspiracy and a lot of, you know, bull about Titanic. And I knew as soon as I studied, I knew there were going to be a lot of misinformation about it, you know, trying to skip past it all. But people do not make it easy, you know, because they're not really interested in facts, which doesn't help people that are. You know, I always like to try and make sure that this is right. So I'd always like to confirm that I have this correct, you know, rather than just make it seem that I do. And, you know, when I post it, you know, I know that a lot of people don't believe that Thomas Andrews actually jumped. You know, maybe because he's a big lad, you know, he's tall and, you know, he's kind of athletic. I know that Captain Smith went and jumped with him. But a lot of people don't believe that he jumped, you know. I do, I believe he did. Um, And yes, I do Titanic meditations. Where past life is concerned, I do try and separate, because it is a childhood connection. So I do try and separate, emotional attachment from childhood to past life kind of related um, things. I do try and separate the two. Because obviously there is an emotional attachment from childhood, and obviously there'll be a connection with past life stuff as well. So I do try and kind of separate the two. Because you can't really let them clash. And I also do have coming Titanic Risen Tarot. I do have that coming as well, and I will be using, and yes, I do work with Thomas Andrews, and yes, I do also work with one of the officers from the Titanic as well. It's mostly kind of just to have them in my life, really. Because that'll also be kind of like a comfort thing, because obviously I've known about Thomas Andrews since I was a kid. And obviously I've known about Moody since I was a kid, from the Titanic film, but it was only a few years ago when I was in the library and I came across him in there. And it took me over a year to find, the grave, because he was never found. So it took me over a year to find that. I'm not really familiar with Dean Row Cemetery, so I didn't find it till about 2020. It took me a year to find it, because I could never find it, but someone helped me find it, and then now I know the way to it now. So that's when I got to find more about him a few years ago. My learning didn't happen all straight away. It did take time over the years, with different things coming up, and, to find out about more. And, so my learning has been over the years. It didn't all come about straight away. It's over the years. And so, but I learned a ton more with going to that museum, because I actually went 3 times. And I even got some memorabilia, but luckily the memorabilia that I had that I lost, I literally have back, because it was all in that memorabilia pack that I bought from the museum as well. And yes, I do own the Heart of the Ocean necklace as well. And so yeah, I do have the Titanic Tarot Risen coming, which is the actual remake, because the original was focused more on like the tragic of Titanic, but this is more focused on life on board Titanic, before the crash. And so I'm more for Oracle than Tarot. So I know that Tarot can appear like quite negative. So, but I'm gonna give this one a shot, because yeah, I am more for Oracle than Tarot. But going on the cards, it could appear to be quite positive, because when it's focusing more on the life on board deck, it could appear to be more of an oracle deck. But I will see when I do reading with it. I will see. I know that when I listened to one of the card readings, it did seem all right. So maybe, hopefully, I'll be able to see it more of an oracle deck than a tarot. So fingers crossed with that one. And I also have done Titanic meditations, as I've said. I've done Titanic guided meditation, which someone did during COVID, when we were all in lockdown, and the Thomas Andrews and Titanic victims, were helping people because they saw the COVID as their iceberg sort of thing. It's kind of helping people, through the lockdowns and things like that. I mean, it is a lockdown related meditation, but I thought to do it because COVID is still around, so obviously you would have to put yourself in lockdown, you wouldn't be able to work or do this. So I just thought to do it for that reason anyway. And I was poorly at the time when I did that meditation, so yeah, I wasn't well. And so I have done like other Titanic related stuff as well, and Titanic episodes and things. I do past life work with the Titanic as well. And I do also have pictures of Titanic on my wall, posters, newspaper articles, and I do have a picture of the band on my wall, and I've got Thomas Andrews on my wall, and I've got Titanic officers and Moody in a frame on my Aphrodite altar, because it's all like sea sea related, and I do have a strong connection to the sea, surrounded by seashells and things, so it's just perfect for that. And I do have the Titanic soundtrack on LP, and I've got the new Titanic film Blood and Steel on the way, and another soundtrack coming, a bag coming, you know, and an Ismay book coming. So I kind of have a Titanic collection going on at the moment, all arriving from eBay and Etsy Store. So even my little boy also likes Titanic as well. You know, he has interest, because when we've gone into like the museums and, you know, the maritime shop, he is actually fairly interested, you know, walking around the museum and doing like little activities, you know, of, you know, finding out, you know, who was Titanic's twin sister, you know, how was Titanic found, you know, what was the name of the cat that was on Titanic, you know, and things like that. So, yeah, that is basically my Titanic journey, you know, of me growing up with it throughout the years and what I've learned over the years and everything that's occurring now. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you have, please give a like and do subscribe to my channel if you're interested in hearing from me in the future. And that's everything, guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.